Hello, I am Pastor Horace Douty in Lexington, Virginia, and each Sunday I bring you a Bible meditation by way of YouTube, which I encourage you to subscribe to, Horace Douty, D-O-U-T-Y, YouTube. And if you enjoy these meditations, then subscribe and share them with your family and your friends. I appreciate that. This is Christmas Day, Christmas Sunday. And the title, what I'm going to do for the meditation, is to read you a classic Christmas story, an old Christmas story. Why the Chimes Rang by Raymond Alden. There was once in a faraway country where few people have ever traveled, a wonderful church. It stood on a hill in the middle of a great city, and every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people thronged up that hill to its great archway. They looked like lines of ants, all moving in the same direction. And when you came to the building itself, there were stone columns and dark passages and a grand entrance leading to the main room of the church. A room so long that one standing in the doorway could scarcely see the other end, where stood the choir loft and the marble altar and the organ. And this organ was so loud that sometimes when it played, people for miles around would close their shutters and prepare for a thunderstorm. No such church as this was ever seen before, especially when it was lighted for some festival and crowded with people. But the strangest thing about it, the whole building, were the wonderful set of chimes. Way all up there was a great tower with ivy growing over it as far up as you could see. The tower was large enough to fit the great church. It rose so far into the sky that it was only in very fair weather anyone could claim to see the top. Even then, people couldn't be certain that the tower was in sight. Up and up it climbed, the stones and the ivy. The men who built the church had been dead for hundreds of years. No one could remember how high the tower was supposed to be. Now all the people knew that at the top of the tower was a chime of Christmas bells. They had hung there ever since the church was built and were the most beautiful bells in the world. Some thought it was because a great musician had cast them and arranged them in their place, and others said no, it's because of the great height which reached up where the air was clear and pure. No one who had heard the chimes denied that they were the sweetest in all the world. Some described them as sounding like angels, others as sounding like strange winds singing through the trees. But the fact was that no one had heard them for years. There was an old man living not far from the church who claimed that his mother had spoken of hearing them when she was a little child, and he was the only one who was sure of as much as that. They were Christmas chimes, you see, and were not meant to be played on common days. It was the custom of Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings to the Christ child. And when the greatest and the best offering was laid on that altar, there used to come sounding through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the air. Some said the wind rang them. Others said that they were so high the angels could get them swinging. But for many years they had not been heard. It was said that people had been growing less careful about their gifts and that no offering was good enough to deserve the music of the chimes. Every Christmas Eve, rich people still crowded to the altar, everyone trying to bring some better gift than any other. The church was crowded with those who hoped that perhaps the wonderful bells might be heard once more. But although the service was splendid and the offering seemed plenty, Only the sound of the wind came from that tower. Now, a number of miles from the city into the country, nothing could be seen of the great church but glimpses of the tower when the weather was white. There lived a boy named Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about Christmas chimes, but they had heard of the service at Christmas. And they had a secret plan. They had often talked about it alone. They would go and see the beautiful celebration. Nobody can guess, little brother, Pedro would say, all the fine things that are there to see and hear. And I have even heard it said that the Christ child sometimes comes down to bless the service. What if we could see him? And the day before Christmas was cold, snowflakes flying in the air, and a hard white crust on the ground. But sure enough, Pedro and little brother were able to slip quietly away in the afternoon, and walking was hard, but they trudged far, hand in hand, that finally they saw the sight of the beautiful city just ahead, and they were about to enter one of the large gates when they saw something dark on the snow near the path, and they stopped to look. It was a poor woman who had fallen just out the city gate, too sick and tired to get in where she might find shelter. The snowdrift made a sort of a pillow for her. She would soon be sound asleep in the winter air, that nobody would ever waken her again. All this Pedro saw just in a moment. He knelt down, tried to arouse her, even tugging at her arm a little, and he turned her face toward him so he could rub some of the snow off of it. He looked at her silently for a moment. Then he stood up and said, "It's no use, little brother. You'll have to go on alone." "Alone?" cried little brother. And not see, you not be there to see the festival?" "No," said Pedro, and he could not keep back a bit of choking sound. "See this poor woman, her face looks like the Madonna, and she'll freeze to death if somebody doesn't care for her. They've all gone to the church now, but when you come back, you can bring others to help. I'll keep her warm, and perhaps get her to eat the bun that is left in my pocket." "But I can't bear to leave you and go alone," said little brother. Pedro insisted, "We need not both of us go, and it had better be I than you. You can easily find your way to the church. You must see and everything twice, little brother. Once for you and once for me. I'm sure the Christ child knows I would love to come, but if you get a chance, little brother, slip up to the altar without getting in anybody's way. Take this little silver coin of mine and lay it down for my offering when nobody is looking. Hurry back. I wish I could go with you." And in this way, he hurried little brother off to the church and winked hard to keep back the tears as he heard the crunching footsteps falling away into the twilight. It was pretty hard to give up the music and the splendor when he had planned for so long to be there. But he knew he had to stay here and care for this poor woman. The great church was wonderful. Everybody said it had never looked so bright and beautiful. When the organ played and the thousands sang, the walls shook with the sound. Little Pedro, away outside the city wall, felt the earth vibrate around him. And at the close of the service came the procession with the offerings to be laid on the altar. Rich men and great men marched proudly up to lay their gifts. Some brought jewels, some baskets of gold. A great writer laid down a book that he had been making for years. And last of all walked the king, hoping with all the rest to hear those chimes of Christmas bells. There went a low murmur through the church as the people saw the king take from his head the royal crown and set it gleaming upon the altar as his gift to the Holy Child. They whispered, "Surely The bells will ring now, for nothing like this has ever happened. But only the cold wind was heard in the tower. The people shook their heads. Some of them said that as they had before, that the bells did not exist and had never rung. The procession ended and the choir began the closing hymn, and suddenly the organ stopped. Everybody looked at the old pastor, who was standing near the altar holding up his hand for silence. Not a sound rose from anybody in the church, but as they strained their ears, there came softly, distinctly, swinging through the air, the sound of the chimes in the tower, far away. And yet so clear the music seemed, sweeter were the notes that anything ever had been heard before, rising and falling away up there in the sky. The people sat for a moment as still as if someone had held them by the shoulders. They all stood together, stared straight at the marble altar to see what was the gift that had awakened the long silent bells. But all that the nearest of them saw was a childish figure of little brother, who had crept softly down the aisle when nobody was looking, and he had carefully laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar. That is why the chimes rang. God bless you. Amen.